Hello everyone and welcome to this Rouxbe live event. My name is Ken Rubin, Chief Culinary Officer here at Rouxbe. You can see we are in a slightly different location than usual, and also I haven't done a live event in I think over a year, so really happy to be here today. We are shooting actually from a studio today. We have some of the Rouxbe team members with us to shoot for two different partner projects that we will keep a little bit secret, but probably announce later in the fall. So we're really excited to have two new partner programs going live this fall, both focused on cooking for health and food as medicine type programming. So should be of interest to many people within our Rouxbe community. So we have here in the background, you'll see Chef Dan Merrick and Chef Eric Weinkoop, Chef Aaron Zerahoon, Daniela, and of course, Patrick, our producer, is here with me live. And I've done a few hundred of these live events with Patrick in a remote studio where I'm sitting in Portland, Oregon. Patrick is in Vancouver, BC, Canada. And this is the very first time in Rouxbe history we've had an event live with Patrick in studio. So really, really happy to be here in person with him today. So you'll see in the background a little bit of action, a little bit of activity. We are live shooting today, so the cameras will be on and off. You'll see some lights probably moving and some people moving in the background. But we're going to have a Ask Me Anything, ask a chef any question you have today. So anything that you have in mind that relates to food and cooking, culinary technique, anything along those lines, you'll have an opportunity today. If it's something I can't answer or don't have a good answer, we might have you connect directly with someone on our team or someone within our support department to better address your question. But it looks like I'm just going to jump in here and just get started. First question is from Chef Shar, who obviously usually is one of the starring chefs on these live events. So I just want to first thank her for her incredible contributions and all the work that she's done to support students in the last number of years through this live event venue. So thank you, Shar. So she asked, if I were a fly in your kitchen after a very, very busy day at work, what would be your quick, easy, plant-based dinner to put together and serve in under 30 minutes? Also, do you batch cook? Thanks, Ken. So my solution to under 30 minutes, Shar, does come down to batch cooking, where I'm typically going to have some number of things already kind of prepared or semi-prepared, whether it's some beans that have already been simmered, or some whole grains I might have already prepared, or even some like vegetables I roasted the day before and then maybe marinated or just have cold that I can use as a topper. But let's just say in this example, I have not batch cooked anything, right? It's 6:30, my kids are coming home, they're hungry. I don't have a lot of time, I've got 30 minutes. So what I'll typically do is just my standard go-to dish, which I'll actually make also if I'm not really in a time crunch, just because I love it so much. We actually had a variation of this dish for lunch here on set with the Rouxbe team. But my go-to is really just a vegetable lentil stew. I make a lot of this. I love red lentils. I love all lentils, but red lentils tend to cook fairly quickly and create just beautiful texture and richness within a dish. So for me, I'll get my Instapot out. I'll take a large onion, whatever other vegetables I have, whether it's some bell peppers or some other things like that, maybe some garlic. I'll put them in the pan with some oil if I want, or without oil if I want to do a dry, no oil saute. Put in some red lentils, maybe a cup and a half or so of red lentils, and then top it with some veggie stock or some water. Put it in there. Within about 8 minutes, I'll have nice soft lentils. If I'm in a hurry, I can release that steam out of the Instapot. If I'm not so much in a hurry, I'll just let it go more natural. But essentially, I just want to cook those lentils until they're nice and soft and even a little bit broken apart. And then once I get that lid off and it's depressurized and it's safe to do that, what I'll do is I'll stir in some other green vegetables. So I'll finally chop some green beans out of the garden. I'll put in some kale or some spinach, some freshly cut tomatoes, all those vegetables that really I only want to simmer or cook for just a few minutes, just to brighten them up. I'm still wanting them to have some texture. And I'll typically serve that with something like my mom's whole wheat pita bread. So very typical. I've got about 24 pita breads here that she made for the cast and crew here this week. But my mom is an amazing cook, and she keeps our house really well stocked with these amazing whole wheat pita breads that she makes pretty much every week. So we'll always have them in the freezer, or we'll have fresh ones. And for me, honestly, Shard, like that's a go-to meal I have at least once a week. Some kind of a lentil dish with whatever vegetables I have, some cooked with the lentils, some added in closer to the end. Typically lots of fresh herbs, so it depends, where I'm going with the dish. I could add some cumin and some mustard seed or some Madras curry. I can also add like morita or chipotle pepper and cumin and some extra garlic and kind of take it to Mexico. But really for me, it's just about having like comfort, warm stew, and then that scoop of some whole wheat pita bread. Super easy, super comfortable for everyone to eat. Also, great leftovers, no problem heating it up the next day, putting it over some brown rice or something else like that. So that's a pretty standard thing for me, I'll say. Hi, Chef Ken. I tried 2 recipes from the new Esselstyn cookbook. The final result did not stick together. Would adding a flax meal, water mix, egg substitute hold the recipe together? I'd have to know more, I guess, about the recipe that you were trying to cook more specifically. But typically, if you're looking for something that needs a binder, if you want to make like a flax egg gel, that's something that you can do. You might need to really maybe up the amount of flax in that egg substitute gel if it's not binding enough. But otherwise, I think to help you, I'd have to know just a little bit more about what specific recipes and like maybe a little bit more about your process and what didn't work for you. Next question here from Nancy. I'd love to learn more about turning my cooking into a business. Will Rouxbe ever consider offering a course on this? I make chocolates right now as a hobby. Could I get some feedback on them from someone like yourself? Can I send you some? Well, thank you, Nancy. Absolutely. The idea of turning your passion around cooking into a business is something that we talk a lot about at Rouxbe. Chef Aaron, who's here on set today, has a real personal passion around entrepreneurship and business development, innovation, and small business. And she herself has dabbled in a number of different food-related type businesses. So she's a great person on our team who I think brings a lot of energy to that. Otherwise, a lot of us on the team, love the idea of using that passion that you have for chocolate or for a plant-based sauce or a salsa company or a baked product company, whatever it might be, turning that into something that's more than just a hobby, whether that's a full-blown business, whether that's a pop-up that you do weekly or monthly, or something you do maybe with your church or your community center or with your school PTA. There's a lot of different ways to kind of leverage that passion. Right now, we're actually looking at trying to figure out, well, what things can we do on Rouxbe from a entrepreneurial business point of view that we could maybe deploy to help our students. So we'd love to hear more from you, Nancy, if there's specific things that you'd like to see in a course about food business development. We'd be all ears and very interested in your feedback. So thank you for that. Linda has a question here about making low-fat coconut milk. So in the previous session, Shar suggested making your own low-fat coconut milk from homemade oat milk plus coconut extract. On Amazon, there are coconut essences and coconut extracts. Are these the same? How much do you use per 100 milliliters of milk? So 100 milliliters of milk is a pretty small quantity, just a few liquid ounces for those who don't use milliliters. So, a cup of milk, let's call it, would be probably about double that volume. My suggestion would be, really following the manufacturer's instructions in terms of potency. I've never worked with a coconut essence. I've worked with coconut extracts, whether they're alcohol-based or glycerin-based. They're typically really, really strong. So you'd measure them in droppers, not in any other sort of, milliliters or things like that. So my suggestion would be, buy a good coconut extract from just an otherwise reputable brand that is making quality extracts. Look for something that has a lot of reviews, even something that if you were to go, say, to like a natural foods market or something like that, you might find some options. But from a flavor perspective, my recommendation would really be to, start with your 100 milliliters, or whatever product you want to actually use it in. And then just start with like 1 or 2 drops, stir it in, give it a sniff, see what the kind of olfactory and what the smell feels like for you, if it is giving off that coconutty aroma, and then give it a taste and see if that aroma carries through that flavor sensory stimulation. If you feel like, wow, that did it, perfect. You know that it's the 1 or 2 drops. That's probably going to be your right ratio. If you need to add a few more, I would just go with that and see kind of where your coconutty flavor threshold is, right? So part of this is, what are you using it in? How much should the coconut come through? How prevalent do you want that coconut, et cetera, et cetera. It's a pretty pronounced flavor once you kind of get into it. So I would say, start with less. It's always easy to add more. Can't take it out once you put it in. But I would let your mouth help you decide, and your senses help you decide what you think the appropriate amount is. But it's probably measured in drops in this scenario with your 100 milliliters. Great question, though. And I did go back and watch that question with Patrick, just from the previous event, just to get a sense of what that project was with Char. So I appreciate that approach to still maintain that flavor without the heavy saturated fat load that the coconut milk would otherwise contain. Next question here from Linda. I need to buy a 10-inch fry pan for no oil frying. I have a very limited budget, about 40 pounds. And the range is huge. Should the description say stainless steel, non-stick? Does non-stick mean coated? Some aluminum and stainless steel? You spent hours on the web. Yeah, there are a lot of different pans out there, Linda. My recommendation is for people who are committing to cooking, and especially committing to cooking no oil or forks over knives style, having a good pan is just a really, really good investment. And I think you can get there within your budget. The key is, for my recommendation, and different chefs might tell you different things. I prefer to use non-stick, which means non-coated pans. Not that I never use non-stick, but for this application, I think that non-stick is the best thing to use. It's going to give you the best results in terms of caramelization and color development. It's going to give you the best results in terms of deglazing a pan and having just non-reactive, no fuss, easy cleanup type situations when you're using a pan for no oil sauteing, where you can really develop a lot of color and a lot of sugars can caramelize in that pan from your onions and whatnot. So having the interior be stainless for me is an important part. Now, for the overall pan construction, some pans are just stainless steel, fantastic. Those are going to be a little bit heavier. Those will be induction ready, meaning you can put it onto an induction cooktop, which is more and more common these days. But it might be more expensive. So there are some pans that recommend, for just cost, savings, they'll recommend like an aluminum exterior, which is great for conductivity. Does not work on induction, but conductivity on a standard electric stove or a standard gas, range works great. You just want to make sure that the quality of the build is really good, because you don't want those two metals, the stainless steel interior and the aluminum exterior, that need to be really sandwiched together. You don't want those to be at all degraded over time. And again, probably not an issue, but just make sure in that scenario it's a high quality pan. My biggest recommendation is, buy the best pan you can, even if it means buying it used. And I buy some things online. Sometimes you can find at a Goodwill, or there's websites for, buying and selling things. There's even like free websites for people who are just giving things away. But it might be one of those things you just keep your eye out for, because having that pan is going to be one of the most important tools in your kitchen. And if I had to spend an extra little bit of money on that pan and a little bit less on something else, that pan is almost like an investment you're making. It's going to make all your cooking, all your food better over time for many, many years. I have pans that I've been using now for 25 or 30 years. So that's the way I kind of run the calculus, is if you can extend that budget up, fantastic. If you can find it used, fantastic. Otherwise, I still think you can probably find some pans, in particular, on sale within that budget. I know that the brand Cuisinart, at least in North America, will oftentimes have great sales. So like during the holiday season in November, December, sometimes you can get like a really nice Cuisinart pan for probably right in your price range, probably like $50 US, or maybe 40 pounds thereabouts, but somewhere in that price range is probably not too far off. Again, I would stay away from aluminum pans on the interior, and I would stay away from nonstick in this particular application. Another Linda has another question here about onion size. So, hello chef, I'm having cut up many an onion for the variety of tasks and forks over knives. I'm wondering how you would describe a large, medium, small onion size-wise. Are there times that I felt like too much onion in a dish for my preparation according to recipes? So, really good question. I mean, this applies to really all vegetables, right? We say things like 1 cucumber, 1 onion, 1 head of lettuce. And because these things are, from nature and have to do with the variety and where they're grown and how they're grown, they can really vary greatly in size. So, this is why recipe writing is a bit of an art and a science, because you're trying to be precise, but you're also trying to understand kind of the reality, the lived experience of regular people who, when they go to the store, if they know they have to buy an onion and use an onion in a recipe, that's easier for them to think of, well, how much onion is a cup of chopped onion, right? Like you might not make that association. But to answer your question, when you think about onions, and of course there's more than just 3 sizes, but let's just say for the sake of the conversation, we'll characterize them by like large onions, medium and small. My overall kind of disposition would be that the small onion is going to be, by weight, maybe 4 or 5 ounces, certainly not more than that. Your medium onion might be double that, so maybe it's 8 ounces, and then your large onion might be double that again. Maybe it's a pound or 13 ounces or 19 ounces, somewhere in that. Again, all using US weight measures. If we're talking about a 16-ounce onion, we're talking about 450 grams, give or take, of weight. So that, of course, translates to different amounts of volume. So if your recipe is calling for a cup of finely diced onion, that will be more weight than a cup of coarsely chopped onion, just by volume, because you're going to have in the coarsely chopped onion a lot more air gaps and space in between the onion, and you'll have less onion per volume. But I also find that just sometimes you go to the supermarket and if you buy onions individually, those are pretty big onions usually. To buy small onions, I really only see those when you buy like a bag of onions. You buy like a bulk 2-3 pound 4 bag where it's in that mesh sack, and that's kind of where I see the smaller onions in that 4 ounce or so weight size. Good thing about the onions is like if you just feel like there's too many, what you could do is just, caramelize them, put them away, use them on some other thing. You can always add them to another recipe. If they've already been cut up and you don't really have anything to do with it, you can put them in a Ziploc bag or put them in a container, pop them in the freezer. If you need to, it gets dropped into a veggie stock that you're making, or you pop it into a pan that you're using to start some soup, or I would add it to my lentil dish that I described earlier. Nothing's going to happen with those onions. Just know that after you chop them up, you want to either freeze them or use them pretty quickly, because they're not going to last in your fridge that well. They're also going to smell, right? So taking care of those more quickly is going to be a good idea. Janine has a question. If someone is eating plant-based purely for health reasons and profoundly misses meat and dairy, what is the best way to choose plant-based recipes to satisfy this? We get questions like this a lot because people you start eating plant-based for a variety of reasons. Sometimes it's because of environmental. Sometimes it's related to people's relationships to animals and the ethics of killing and eating animals. For many people, it's just a straight health decision. Their doctor, their healthcare practitioner says, here's some things that we're concerned about. We know that if you change your diet, you wouldn't have maybe some of these symptoms or some of these conditions. So for those individuals, I think you still maybe have a desire, a wish, a craving for some of those foods because they represent your childhood, positive memories. You just like the aesthetics of it, right? You like the texture, you like the flavor, the richness. All that is totally, I think, fair game. So when it comes to how do you build meals that are really satisfying, I think it's about really building that kind of base of what are those 2, 3, 4, 5 recipes that you develop, for your own palate, your own flavor, that has big, bold flavor. It has enough of a caloric density or a mass or a weight, so maybe you feel more full or more satisfied. Even from a textural point of view, finding those foods if you want to have a certain chew or a bite or a texture. So for me, I love that texture of mushrooms or seitan with mushrooms, where you do get some of that quote meaty type texture. And those are all very satisfying. I would say beyond that, just really build flavor. So all those techniques that are good for developing umami and developing a range of flavors in food, whether that's roasting or dry sauteing or grilling, broiling, things that add coloration, caramelization, crispiness on the exterior, texture, things that concentrate flavors tend to be really, really satisfying in that way. And then look at all those things that create umami, right? So whether it's different types of ferments, things like miso, koji-based ferments that might be in other categories outside of kind of the miso soy family, lots of different types of sauces to dress things up. These are all things that I think are going to help with some of that richness. I also know for some people it just means having to feel full and to feel that kind of energy. Again, because of their need to have a larger caloric base potentially. It might be that you have an extra meal or you have an extra large snack, because when you're eating a lot of plants, you're just not getting that caloric hit that you would if you had a meal full of meat or dairy or other sorts of things. In most cases, absent having a lot of nuts and seeds and things like that. But really, if you can find a few recipes, a good hearty chili or a stew, a good filling for an enchilada or a taco or a ravioli or a sandwich filling, that gives you that feeling that you're looking for, that creates that sense of satisfaction, that's going to be really, really key. Some of the things around dairy I find also really interesting. I don't do a lot of dairy in any regard, but for me, when I do, say like a flatbread with some really thick cultured cashew cream that goes under the broiler, so it gets kind of oozy and a little bit bubbly and a little bit browned, Like, it doesn't take a lot of that to be really, really satisfied with that like hit of mouthfeel and that kind of fattiness from that kind of a product. So some of those little tricks can really, really help. Sorry if I'm off subject. I've been wondering, since Forks Over Knives promotes no oil cooking and food, what about fish oil supplements? So, in the Forks Over Knives philosophy, it's not only no added oil, but it's also no animal products. So it's a completely plant-based, vegan approach within the Forks Over Knives philosophy. So that would, eliminate fish oil from being a possible supplement. Now, for people who are looking for omega-3 fatty acids or DHA supplements and things like that, there are plant-based versions of those products if that's what you're looking for, and certainly something that you could talk to your healthcare professional about if you're trying to replace some of the beneficial essential fatty acids typically found in fish, if you're trying to still maintain that within a whole food plant-based diet. Next question from Sandra. With a diagnosis of osteoporosis, what is the best vegan or whole food plant-based diet recommendation? Should include vitamin or mineral supplements. Sandra, I'm going to ask you to talk to your healthcare practitioner. I don't know what exactly your diagnosis is or what your course of care might be, but in terms of making sure you have all the right micronutrients and that you're getting the right balance, I would certainly talk to your healthcare practitioner. She or he can certainly point you in the right direction in terms of what your requirements might be, what supplementation they might recommend, again, given your particular health situation. Great question, though. Next question here from Stacy. I've been trying to get a sourdough starter going for 2 weeks. The ratio I've been using is 14 grams of starter, 60 grams of water, 60 grams of flour. It's nice and bubbly, smells right, but does not double in size after it is fed. Is my ratio off? Stacy, I don't think so. Your ratio sounds really good. Sometimes what we see with some of these sourdough starters, and about 50-50 is pretty spot on for most cases. Sometimes you just feel like it might be a little bit loose. And if it's too loose, in other words, too hydrated, not enough flour, a little bit too much water, you'll find that it can bubble up and bubble up and bubble up, but then it kind of collapses on itself because it's creating so much air without the opportunity for that flour to create some structure, right, to lift up. And sometimes it just won't completely double. Maybe it'll go up by a certain percentage, but it won't double in size. And I would say that's actually not a problem. As long as it's working and creating that good ferment and you have that happening, you're probably good. It just means you have to just maybe have a little bit more time, or maybe that needs a little bit more oomph. It could be that you want to just let it sit on your counter and kind of activate a little bit harder on the first round. In other words, a little bit more time, a little bit more warmth before you put it in a fridge to let it kind of maybe do its thing more over time. It really depends on what your practice, what your protocol is. But if you're worried about the doubling part, you might just increase your flour just a touch and see if that helps with your structure within that sourdough starter. But it's all fun stuff, and as long as it's bubbly and smells right, you're off to the right start for sure. When roasting vegetables, is there a rule of thumb for choosing a glass dish or metal roasting pan? So Eugenie, I typically use 90% of the time, I use a metal roasting pan, standard kitchen half sheet pan with either a silpat or a piece of parchment paper. That's just the habit that I have. It's fast, it's easy cleanup. In a commercial kitchen, being a professional chef, I just got used to not really having a lot of glass around because it tends to be a hazard for cookware. I also find that the metal roasting pan heats up really quickly, transfers heat really well. They're light, they're inexpensive. I have about a half dozen of them that I use on rotation. And most of the time with what I'm roasting, I can reuse that piece of parchment paper. If I'm roasting without oil or without any strong ingredients, it's just some broccoli on a pan or whatever with some onions. I'm not even going to wash that piece of parchment. I'll just use it again the next day because I'm not worried about anything foodborne coming out of that in a 400-degree oven with some veggies. Glass dish is fine if that's what you have. You might have a little bit more, if there's some cleanup on it or whatever, but that's perfectly fine. I would just say the most important thing for roasting veggies is, don't crowd the pan. Get the pan or get the oven nice and hot. And if you have a convection option, use convection because that's going to help with air circulation. It'll help with even heat distribution. It'll help having all the crispiness and exterior texture to your liking. Next question here from Terry. How do I keep the inside of stainless steel shiny and beautiful the way it was when my mom used it for years? Well, gosh, I'm not sure what your mom did to keep her stainless steel so shiny. There are products out there that you can use, to clean the inside of your pan to make it nice and shiny looking. There's a product called Barkeeper's Friend, I believe what it's called, that I've used in the past that will work if you are really looking to take some interior stainings or surface stainings off the pan. But otherwise, I would say if it doesn't really bother you, don't sweat it. Like I use my pans to cook if they have a little bit of discoloration here and there. Doesn't personally bother me, but if you want to keep them in tip-top shape, I would recommend getting one of those, one of those products you can take a scouring pad to and just kind of clean it up. That works really well. You'll notice if you're doing a lot of forks over knife style cooking, no oil cooking, or even just a lot of sauteing, even with oil, you'll notice that pan discoloration is a pretty common thing. Sometimes those pans that were shiny and beautiful just weren't being used very much. So if you're cooking a lot, like if you're cooking every day, a lot of those pans are going to have just a little bit of a change over time. Not that you can't bring them back to life. Lily says, I just bought a bunch of kale at the market and decided to dehydrate half of it. The taste is pretty bland and neutral. Any suggestions of how to use it in cooking? Well, gosh, Lily, when I dehydrate kale, I always apply a seasoning or a flavoring scheme to it because I just want to take that dried kale and just eat it like a chip or a snack. So typically when I get kale from the market and I want to use it in a dehydration type scenario, I'll take it, I may add just a tiny bit of maple, maybe some miso. It could be a soy sauce and apple cider vinegar. I could put dehydrated garlic and onion and chili flake on it. Any number of things, any kind of flavors you want to use. So, but essentially I'll just coat those leaves with just a little bit of a seasoning. It could be some dried spices. It could be some other umami-rich ingredient, like I said, miso or soy or some other thing. Sometimes a little bit of acid is also nice. And then, not too much, again, because you're trying to dry these out. You don't want to add too much liquid, but just enough to kind of coat these things. Some people like different types of coatings. You can put sesame seeds, nutritional yeast. All those things can also help, and adding some crunch and some texture. But that's typically the way that I would use it, just from a dehydrated point of view. Otherwise, it is just like a dried kale leaf, right? It's probably tastes pretty good, but it's not going to have a whole lot of excitement. So maybe just give it a try next time, Lily, and see what those kind of kale chips look like for you. Those work really well in a dehydrator at a low temperature. If you don't have a dehydrator, what I recommend is putting your oven on to like the warm setting, which is usually like a 175, and putting them in there, maybe kind of manipulating it a bit if it's getting too hot, opening up the oven door. If you can have a convection fan, move the air around, that also helps. Any combination of things. Then just at some point, just turn the oven off and let it just kind of be warm and dehydrate those kale chips. You don't want to go too hot because you don't want to like scorch or burn the kale. When a recipe calls for 2 cups of nuts soaked overnight, do you measure the nuts before or after soaking? Typically, you're going to measure those nuts dry, and then you're going to just add whatever soaking liquid, and those are going to swell. And you'll likely have probably closer to 2.5, maybe even 3 cups in the case of like soaking almonds or something like that afterwards. So if it calls for 2 cups, I would just start with that. It's going to give you a pretty good approximation. If you find that in your recipe it's too much, you might go back and just make a note and say, hey, 2 cups of dry, a little bit too much. Next time I make it, I'm going to do 1.5 cups or 1 2/3 or whatever. And that way you know the next time you make it, you have the proper quantity. But I wouldn't sweat it. I would just start with 2 cups and then just kind of see how it works. I'm a vegan home cook, chef, and I'm enrolled. Do you have any recommendations on vegan meat options that are 4% or less fat grams and low sodium? Lisa, I'm not, too up on the wide array of plant-based meat alternatives right now. I've certainly tried many of them. I just don't know, offhand which of those brands are going to fit that requirement that you have for fat and the sodium requirement. I do know that a lot of the major brands are not trying to be low fat or low sodium. They're not part of the value proposition for people. They're really trying to create, in many cases, something that mimics a product that you'd see at a supermarket, fast food, or quick service type restaurant, or something that really as a stand-in for some of these otherwise processed foods. I'm sure there are people making, lower fat, lower sodium alternatives. I'm just not as tuned in to some of those commercially made products. Now, if you were looking to make your own vegan meats, right, you could do any number of things depending on what you wanted to use as a base. So, old school from the 70s, you'd use something like textured vegetable protein. You grind it with some, roasted cauliflower and maybe some toasted walnuts, and that could be, ground up together and be a really unique, soy plus veggie plus nut kind of ground meat option. You can also just make, lentils. You could just take like red lentils or other sorts of lentils and give them a mash, and that can be a stand-in in like a lentil bolognese. And some people find that little bit of a lentil bite to be, close enough to like little bits and pieces of ground meat, let's say, within like a bolognese or tomato sauce. So it really depends on what it is you're trying to do with these meat alternative options, and how you see it in the final product and so on. But I'm sure if you were to do a search or even just do kind of an analysis, a survey of some of the packaged products available, you might, number one, quickly see that a lot of them are not low fat or low sodium, but you might find those brands that are giving more of that brand promise around, plant-based, but also not high fat, low, high sodium type of thing. I'm sure someone's out there doing it for sure. Lisa also says, do you have any recommendations for salad dressings that are free of sugar and low sodium? Yeah, I would make your own, Lisa. So within our Rouxbe world, whether it's programs through Forks Over Knives or Plant-Based Professional or other programs that we have, there are lots and lots of salad dressing, vinaigrette, other options that would have no sugar and as much or as little sodium as you wanted to add, right? Depending on what the ingredient set was. So, feel free to dig into the Rouxbe website. You could do some free, searches within the recipe area, and just see what you find. A lot of them are going to be, kind of creamy dressings based on nuts or seeds or tahini or white beans. Some are going to be like thinner dressings based on like oil and vinegar, depending on your disposition. But there's going to be a lot of options if you're looking for something without sugar and with a low sodium content. Next question from Anita. Do you have any suggestions on modifying a dressing recipe that is just balsamic vinegar, garlic, and olive oil? What is a good substitute for the oil in this situation? So, in this type of situation, if you're going to omit the oil, what I would suggest is really finding some other ingredients to bolster and create some of that emulsion, sense of creaminess within this type of a recipe. So you could do something like balsamic vinegar. In this case, get the best vinegar you can, because this flavor is going to carry the recipe. So it's going to be a chance to let that balsamic flavor kind of be the star. So in this example, I would recommend, getting a quality balsamic vinegar. I would also, instead of just using like raw garlic, I'd probably double up on the garlic in the recipe, but I would roast it. So take a whole head of garlic, wrap it in foil or parchment, and then you can roast that in the oven until it's really, really soft and almost creamy. Pop it out of those, the garlic cloves out of the skins, and that roasted softness and also the extra amount of garlic is going to be fantastic. So I would do balsamic, a little bit of white bean cooked, like just canned white beans or cooked white beans, probably just a few ounces, garlic, and then whatever aromatic herbs you wanted to add to that. You could bolster also with a little bit of tomato product, either fresh tomato or some tomato paste. That's going to add some umami and some depth. And then whatever else you want to kind of give that characteristic sweetness that balsamic has. Sometimes people might bump that up with a tiny bit of maple syrup or a little bit of date paste or something like that. But balsamic definitely does well with a little bit of an extra sweet pairing in some cases. But take the oil out, create that mouthfeel by having really nicely cooked white beans blended thoroughly with your balsamic. Thin it out with a little bit of water if you need to. You might even thin it out with a tiny bit of vegetable stock if you want some additional umami. But you want to get that dressing so it's got nice adherence, so that when you put it on a salad, it's like sticking to all those leaves without being, gloopy or gloppy or too heavy. This is an odd question. Is there a way to cook or roast corn on a cob in a no oil cooking pan technique or something like that? I'm in an apartment, don't have an outdoor facility, but love to have the roasted flavor. So really good question here, Cynthia. So I would do this. If you're in an indoor apartment and don't have an outdoor space, and you want to create that kind of roasted or like charred corn, I would take the corn, if you just got, corn in a bag, frozen corn, I would take that corn, I would rinse it and make sure it was dry on a sheet pan. This is a time you don't want to use parchment, because I'm about to put this pan under a broiler, and parchment paper and broilers don't go together. But you just put it into a pan. You could put down a piece of foil if you like, or just a straight pan. Put your corn on it and put it under the broiler. And that top level hot, pre-roasted broiler, that broiler is going to basically create a lot of radiant heat from above. And what it'll do after about 2 or 3 minutes, you want to watch it, because it goes from being like beautiful golden brown to like not golden brown and charred pretty quickly. But you want to watch that pan and see it's getting a little bit bubbly, a little bit toasty. You'll see the color change. It'll work on frozen corn, but I've only really done it on fresh corn off the cob. So take it off the cob, put it on your sheet pan, put it in the broiler, 2, 3, 4 minutes, pull it out. You should get some nice coloration on that. Probably your best option. The only other way I could really think of doing that would be to have it in a hot pan, and then just something to kind of weight it down a little bit so you get that like contact, so you get enough of a cook where you might get a little bit of color on it. But otherwise, I think the broiler is going to be your best bet. Hi, Chef Ken. I signed up for the intro pastry and baking course. I've always wanted to do it. I'm leaving for a month in Paris. Classes at Le Cordon Bleu and Escoffier. Probably won't get through the material in 4 months. Will I get a certificate? So Aruna, if you are not able to get through the material, you will not be awarded a certificate. If you need more time to do the program, my recommendation would be to send an email to our support team and let them know your situation, and we can think about maybe putting your program on pause or just figuring out a way to give you some extra time so that you don't have to worry about the time while you're in Paris. You should definitely use that time to enjoy yourself and not be worried so much about the Ruby program. But certainly email us to let us know. To get the certificate, you have to complete the program. That's just sort of the basic rules of that, just to keep the academic integrity and out of fairness for all the other students who are participating. Another question here from Dr. KK. Thank you for answering my other question. One more. Would you teach us how to make your mother's whole wheat pita bread? Love those moms. I could ask her for the recipe. It's something that she's been doing so long that she just does it kind of by sight. And her big thing is she's really interested in different types of heirloom whole wheat flours. So that's kind of her thing, is she'll really seek out unusual heirloom flours that are being ground fresh on a daily or weekly basis. And she'll use a lot of these unusual flours, whether it's a wheat flour or rye flour, to make some of these different pita breads. But it's a standard pita. She makes it just in her home oven. The key is really just nice amount of hydration, plenty of water, and super hot oven. So when you put that pita down, you get that kind of characteristic puff. And that your pita is going to have really that nice division where there's two sides, one being slightly thicker than the other, but just that kind of amazing texture. So it's just one of those things I've been eating for so long. I almost take it for granted that it's available to me. But they are fantastic, and just again really easy. Just yeast and flour and water, and then if you want to add a little bit of salt, which will change your yeast response just a little bit, you can add salt, or it can just be that simple with the yeast, flour, water. And one more question here. What is the best way to roast vegetables without coating them in oil? So this is a standard technique, Mary, that we teach within many of our programs, including the Forks Over Knives program. And there's a lot of different ways to do this. It really depends on the vegetables that you're roasting and the flavors that you want on those vegetables. Typically when I'm roasting vegetables without oil, I'm going to cut my vegetables a little bit smaller than typical with oil roasting, because I don't want them to dry out too much before they kind of finish cooking. So I'll typically roast them a little bit hotter, a little bit faster, and a little bit smaller dice. But in terms of coating them with something that's not oil, there's really any number of things that I'll use. Everything from just a splash of, veggie stock with some dried, spices. It could be just a little bit of dehydrated onion or some cumin powder or some paprika. It could be a smoked chili pepper. It could be just as simple as just a little bit of black pepper, a little bit of salt. The idea here is you want to create something to help with the adherence on the exterior part of the vegetables, but not something that in the hot oven is going to burn and smoke and create off flavors. So typically what I'll do when I'm roasting without oil is I'll apply some flavoring, in advance, so that while I'm cooking, I'm getting some development of flavor. And then I'm monitoring a nice hot oven, not crowding the pan, even moving things on the pan, kind of scooping and rearranging to make sure I'm getting good coverage. But then the second thing I do is I'll typically apply a second round of flavoring right when that vegetable is done and coming off the sheet pan. So an example here would be like, great, I've got some roasted sweet potatoes that I roasted very simply with maybe just a tiny bit of salt and pepper, and I'm going to pull them off, and I'm going to toss in some chopped spinach leaves and some chili peppers and some other herbs, and just be like done, and be like, great. That will sort of wilt and heat, and that makes a beautiful side dish. that it's just going to be something that looks really attractive. But it's a secondary flavor that I'm building after I've already established that primary flavor. And then after, I kind of decide where my flavor is going to go. So it's going to look really delicious, even just with some herbs. But if you add things like some chopped up greens, again, kale, spinach, whatever it might be, that's also going to be really, really great. Wonderful. Well, I think that's all we have for today. Hopefully you got some great action behind us watching the team here at Rouxbe work away on this. Just wanted to again thank Patrick. It's great to be in the same room doing this. This is pretty fun. And thanks to all of you students out there. Really appreciate your questions. Really excited to have you with us. And again, if we couldn't answer your question, please reach out to our team. So until next time, have a great day and happy cooking. Take care.